This video covers the IGCSE Biology Objective 3.1.3 on the 2025 CAIE syllabus to state that some substances move in and out of cells by diffusion. So just before we get into this, diffusion can happen in a gas, it can happen in a liquid, and so it could happen in water, it can happen in the air, but now we're going to focus on what happens in a cell. So a cell is separated from its environment by the cell membrane, which is depicted here. And so we have what we call the extracellular space, which is fluid. And so that is the area outside of a cell. And then we have the cytoplasm of a cell. Both of these, which is inside the cell, both of these areas are fluids, and so the molecules which are moving through them are going to move by diffusion because they're moving through fluids. Additionally, the molecules are dissolved molecules, and that is so they can get through the cell membrane, which we'll learn a little bit more about much later in the syllabus. So we've seen this video before, this little animation, but what happens is the molecules will move from the extracellular space, because that is the region where they were in concentration, to the cytoplasm of the cell, because that is where there was a lower concentration of the same molecules. Now, let's not forget that extracellular space is not just next to one cell. They're going to be next to many, many cells. And so this diffusion of molecules is going to be happening with many cells, not just the one that's pictured here. But in order for the molecules to get into the cell, we're talking nutrients and other molecules that the cell needs in order to survive, we need to have a mode of movement. And so this mode is diffusion. All right, so let's talk about cellular diffusion and why this is important. And so we're going to take a look at one of the prime examples that you need to know, and that is in the respiratory system. So we have some lungs pictured here, and we know, hopefully, that when we breathe air into the lungs, it travels through the trachea and the bronchi and the bronchioles down to the alveoli, the air sacs, which are microscopic, and the lining or the cellular wall of the alveoli is thin enough to allow for quick diffusion of oxygen molecules, which then move across the wall of the alveoli, across the blood vessel wall into the blood, and then to the red blood cells. Additionally, the blood would be carrying carbon dioxide from our muscle cells up to the lungs. And so now in this picture, the carbon dioxide is pictured on the red blood cell, which doesn't actually happen, but for now that's fine. And so the carbon dioxide will move through the blood vessel wall, through the alveoli wall, into the lungs, and then we exhale out. So that's the process of breathing that occurs. So let's talk about diffusion at two key locations in this diagram. The first one is the diffusion of oxygen. That is the movement of the oxygen molecules from the lungs to the red blood cell, and this is due to the concentration gradient. Let's not forget the blood is coming into the lungs deoxygenated at this point. So that means there's a very low amount of oxygen in the blood as it goes into the lung capillaries from the heart. And so because the lungs are filled with air, which has 20% oxygen in it, the oxygen concentration in the lungs is much higher, and so the moisture in the lungs, as the oxygen moves in through the alveoli wall, will dissolve the oxygen and allow it to get into the bloodstream and get to the red blood cells, which then are continuously being pumped to the body via the heart. And so this continuous flow of blood that is deoxygenated will always create a concentration gradient that allows the oxygen molecules to move from your lungs into the blood. The second area of cellular diffusion is where the carbon dioxide molecules are going to leave the blood and enter the lungs. So again, the carbon dioxide moves by diffusion, and in this case, it's from the blood plasma, not the red blood cell, but for the diagram, it's fine. So it's moving from the blood plasma, which is the liquid portion of the blood, into the lungs, again, due to the concentration gradient. So the activity of our body, all of the energy requirement that we need, creates a lot of carbon dioxide. So all that carbon dioxide has moved into the blood and has come to the lungs, where there is a very low percentage of carbon dioxide. It's like under 0.5% of the air has carbon dioxide when we breathe in. So the percentage or the concentration of carbon dioxide in our blood is much higher, which creates a higher concentration compared to the lungs, which has a much lower concentration. So those molecules are going to move down the concentration gradient into the blood. And so the constant flow of blood is always going to create this concentration gradient, where the blood at the lung capillary area has a higher concentration of CO2 compared to the lungs. And so the molecules will then diffuse through the blood vessel wall, through the alveoli wall, into the air sacs, and then we exhale out.